When we want to compare two things, we use comparative sentences, and you've learned about these before. If we talk about the two videos that you watched for the tutorial, the one with the Scottish grandmother reading Wonky Donkey to her grandson, and the TOEFL video, there's lots of differences between those two speakers. So let's take a look at what we have. If we have a look at number 1 here, we can say that the Wonky Donkey video was funnier than the TOEFL video. And the word funnier is what part of speech? Is it an adverb, adjective, noun, or verb? You're right, it's an adjective. So what we have here is a comparative adjective sentence, okay, where we have the verb, the comparative adjective funnier, and then we have the word than. Okay, and this is what you learned about in FE3. We could go on and talk about number 2. The TOEFL video was more informative than the Wonky Donkey video. Okay, definitely not funnier, but whoops, probably more informative. Okay, so let's highlight that. And taking a look at the word informative, this one also is an adjective, right? Right. Let's go down and look at number 3. The grandmother laughs more loudly than the baby. What kind of word is loudly? You're right, it's an adverb. Oops. Maybe I'll write that one out. Okay, and let's look down at number 4. The TOEFL speaker talks more robotically than the grandmother. Oops. Sorry about that. Ah! Oh dear, I didn't mean to erase more. Wait a minute. Let me go back and write that in again. Talks. Let me get my box. There we go. Talks more robotically than the grandmother. Okay, what kind of word is robotically? Yeah, you're right. It's also an adverb. So what we have in sentences 1 and 2 are comparative adjective sentences. Okay, and what we have in numbers 3 and number 4 is we have comparative adverb sentences. There we go. There's an abbreviation from note-taking. Sent for sentences. Okay? And this is what you have learned in previous English classes. In AE1, what we start to talk about are comparative and superlative and equative nouns and verb sentences. So let's have a look at what those look like. Now when we want to compare the two recordings or the two videos using nouns and verbs, we have a different kind of sentence. Let's have a look down here at number 1. The Wonky Donkey story has fewer words than the TOEFL lecture. What kind of word is words? Is it a noun, verb, adjective, adverb? Yeah, it's a noun. So this sentence is comparing the nouns. It's comparing the noun words in the Wonky Donkey story compared to the words, compared to the words in the TOEFL lecture. And we can see the comparative structure right here. Okay. The Wonky Donkey story has fewer words than the TOEFL lecture. That's quite different than what we've got going on up here, where we see that the donkey story is funnier than the TOEFL lecture, right? Funnier is an adjective. So this is a comparative adjective sentence. Down here, the Wonky Donkey story has fewer words than the TOEFL lecture. Words is a noun, and we're comparing how many words the TOEFL lecture has compared to the Wonky Donkey story. Let's look at another example below in number 2. The TOEFL lecture provides more detail than the Wonky Donkey story. The TOEFL lecture provides more detail. What kind of word is detail? Yeah, you're right. It's another noun. Okay, then the Wonky Donkey story. And again, we have that structure again of comparative language. Okay, you're always going to see these words like than. Oops, I should have had this over a little bit more. Let's circle that part too. Okay, so than is a common element in those comparative sentences, and those are things that you already know. One of the things that you need to pay attention to when creating comparative noun sentences is whether or not the noun is countable or whether the noun is a non-count noun. That will determine what this word is right here. Okay. We know that we use the word fewer when we're talking about words that are countable. So the word words is a countable word. Oh boy, maybe I shouldn't have chosen the word. Anyway, I hope you understand what I mean. If we change that word to something else, if we change it to something that's uncountable, okay, let's do that. Let's say this was vocabulary. Okay, the Wonky Donkey story has vocabulary than the TOEFL lecture. Now that we have a word that is uncountable, okay, or a non-count word, that has an impact on what word we're going to use here. What am I going to use here instead of fewer? I can't say fewer vocabulary because vocabulary is a non-count or uncountable noun. So what do I say instead? Are you thinking of something? Did you think less? If you did, you're right. Okay. So when we're making comparative noun sentences, we have to think about whether or not the noun is countable or uncountable, and that will determine what happens here, whether we can say fewer or less. Let's look now at some of the comparative adverb sentences. The grandmother laughs more loudly than the baby. Okay. This is definitely a comparative adverb sentence. Okay, we've got the adverb right here. It talks about how she laughs. And we've got our comparative language here with more and with than. Okay, let's have a look at the two examples below. Now we just have the grandmother laughs more than the baby. The TOEFL speaker laughs less than the grandmother. Notice that the adverb now is missing. Whoops. Okay, laughs less than the grandmother. Okay. So when we're looking at those two sentences below, what we see is that both of these ones, these are comparative verb sentences. And it's easy to get mixed up between comparative verbs and comparative adverbs because they're quite close, right? The only difference here is that in the comparative verb sentences, we're just comparing the verb. Laughs more than. Laughs less than. Okay? Whereas in the adverbs, we're talking about We're using the adverb to talk about how the woman or how the grandmother laughs. She laughs more loudly than the baby. Not just more than the baby, but more loudly than the baby. Okay, so that's why that adverb is there. And so that's really it for comparative nouns and verbs. So try the practice in your course pack that I assigned for homework. If you can't remember where it is, take a look on Blackboard, and you can come back and review this tutorial anytime.